Just moving on the next topic, Ron. What is your sentiment about the Lincoln Project?
Oh, I think they're heroes. I think they are the resistance heroes. I welcome them aboard. I actually have a Lincoln Project tattoo. It's on my butt. I won't show it, but no, I think they're
It's
they're a
okay,
bunch
Ron. You
of
can show it. It's
they're a
okay.
bunch of Republicans who don't like Trump because he's mean, and that's that. And the Democratic establishment, because they're Republican like themselves, they cling to these grifters to try to make it out like that's a recipe for winning. Well, guess what? You tried it in 2016, and it didn't work that time. And if Donald Trump is not reelected, it won't be because these moderate Republicans just couldn't get on board with how brutal he is. It will be because Trump beat himself. It'll be because Trump is just so incompetent that so many people realize he's just in over his head. So they're going to take a chance on this babbling guy who is going to be dragged across the finish line, basically. That's why, if Donald Trump doesn't continue his presidency, that will be why.
Right.
And institutions like the Lincoln Project and Nancy Pelosi, when they go, oh, I hope the GOP gets their party back.
Yeah.
What they're
We need a
really doing
strong.
at the end of the day is they are helping the GOP.
Yeah,
And maybe they
exactly.
realize that, maybe they don't. I think they probably do, but they are helping the GOP because in reality, here's like a metaphor I like to use. So let's say the GOP is an actor or actress, and they get ready on a movie set, and they're getting their makeup done, and the wrinkles are all smoothed out. They got like the skin tone is exactly the right way where it's going to look as bright as possible on camera, and they're doing the scenes, and they're being nice to the makeup artist, and they're being nice to the crew because they want to keep up appearances, and they're just like, hey, so that's the GOP under regular circumstance, right? That's the GOP. Then they go back to their trailer after a long day of shooting. They take their makeup off and they have some blemishes. They're on the phone with their spouse and they're about to get a divorce because in reality, they're a narcissist who doesn't care about anyone but themselves, and they're a horrible partner, and their personal life is in the shitter, and they're chain smoking like it's going out of business to cope with it all. That's Trump. And guess what? At the end of the day, it's the same thing. The GOP is Trump. Trump is the GOP policy wise. Policy to
Yep.
policy, they are the exact same thing. What Donald Trump doesn't have is any subtlety. So he is just the
Right.
mask off of the GOP. But that's how horrible the GOP really is. Noam Chomsky described them as one of the greatest threats to humankind. And he's freaking right. How are they able to be that repulsive? Because they don't have any real opposition.
Exactly. Well, there's no real opposition party in this country, and it doesn't help when people like the Lincoln Project take and co-opt using progressive language to kind of turn it around. So Cenk had a interview with the founder, one of the co-founders of the Lincoln Project. His name is Rick Wilson
Oh, that
Jones.
guy is so off putting.
And
Rick Wilson is so incredibly off putting. I actually, well, anyway, sorry,
no, I
continue.
was just listening to a little bit of it, and it became basically he asked them like, you used to be Republicans, why don't you like Trump? Well, Trump is mean, he's bad, he's nasty, it became like a very childlike description of Trump, and I get it, but it's like, why are we, I don't know, we love interviewing people we don't agree with, but at the same time it's the Lincoln Project framing them as helping progressives to me is really dangerous because they're a right wing organization that is trying to basically co-opt people into believing what they're saying is anything more than right wing, even though it is. So what I'm seeing, Ron, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, is not just Donald Trump pushing people towards fascism, but the Democratic Party pushing people towards fascism because of their ineptitude, because of their lack of actual opposition, and because of their blatant hypocrisy. People are like, wait a minute, why would I be in this party? At the very least, Republicans, like you say, the GOP, they take their mask off, whereas Democrats keep the mask on and continue being vile on the inside. So what it seems to me, it's a very dangerous trend that we're seeing where these groups pretend to be different than Trump, but at the end of the day, as you say, policy wise, they are essentially the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
just more
Well,
polite.
Well, yeah, and I think to your point about like how the entire duopoly, Republicans and Democrats, push people to fascism, um, I think that's true, but not just because of, well, one is more subtle than the other. The Democrats are more subtle than the Republicans, but also because, you know, the Democrats have also normalized people like John Kasich,
Yep.
people like Colin Powell, yeah, people who have never seen a war they didn't like. They've normalized that as being an alternative to the most conservative option, which, I mean, when you just take a look at it from the Overton window perspective, which is like the window of, what you see as appropriate conversation in your contemporary political landscape, that is so far to the right, you need to buy a different camera to zoom out far enough. It's absolutely batshit crazy. Colin Powell, John Kasich, and now stuff like the Lincoln Project, which, I would love to interview the Lincoln Project, but I would only have one question for them. This is why I would love to interview them. I would simply look at them and I would just say, policy wise, how is Donald Trump different than the GOP? And they would talk about how mean he tweets. They would talk
Yep.
about all the awful things he said. They would talk about him as a despicable individual, which of course he is. And when they got finished, rehashing their talking points that are pre-scripted, I would say, I agree with everything you just said. But I'll repeat my first question because that's not the question I asked. I don't need you to tell me how awful Donald Trump is. I can tell you about how awful Donald Trump is because I can also talk about awful policies he's instituted. My question to you was, how is Donald Trump different policy wise than the GOP? And eventually it would come to the surface that they're not able to answer that question because the answer to that question at the end of the day is he's not different. He's just a jerk and we really want our party to do well. So we feel like eventually this jerk might make us look bad. In some ways, he already has. And
Yeah.
we don't want that to
Too late.
continue. So we're trying to distance ourselves from this jerk. And when people like Nancy Pelosi and whoever else legitimizes us, they're really helping the GOP.
Precisely, which is why it's really scary to me when Ilhan Omar shared this tweet. Now, I'm not one to cancel people over tweet sharing. We saw that whole thing happen with Tulsi Gabbard where she shared she said Project Veritas, this video, blah, 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 without vetting enough. And, she apologized to Ilhan. But then we have Ilhan Omar sharing this tweet talking about what Lincoln Project says is we dragged him out. Where's Trump? And they were talking about Donald Trump and a message from Donald Trump. And Ilhan Omar retweeted that saying, sadly, he is so easily manipulated. Now, I don't think, I don't make it a whole huge deal of people like taking something on Twitter, etc. But I've seen multiple people on the progressive side kind of fall into what the Lincoln Project has been saying without actually knowing who they are. And I find that really dangerous because organizations like the Lincoln Project, like PragerU, like QAnon, these entities, I think they're there to have a sort of effect where they put truth surrounded by a bunch of lies in order to get a rise out of whatever audience they're targeting. So, for instance, for QAnon and PragerU, they're targeting the right. For Lincoln Project, they're targeting the right that doesn't like Trump and the centrist neoliberal moderates. So it's just interesting to me that I'm seeing a lot of these orgs pop up with a lot of misinformation, but at the end of the day, they all policy-wise are supporting the right. And when they're kind of uplifted and promoted by people who should know better, it seems to me like that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen some of what you're talking about too. I mean, because sometimes the Lincoln Project, they just kind of tweet out like they're almost like jokes.
Yeah.
Much. Like, and they're just kind of like anti-Trump sentiments. And I think there are people who retweet them without really knowing who they're retweeting. Although all the stuff we're saying, by the way, none of this is some like we had to do some sleuthing to find this out. I mean, if you just Google the Lincoln Project, it will just come up. There are a bunch of Republicans who don't like Trump. This isn't hidden information.
No.
And Rick Wilson, who, I mean, I've seen a couple. I think I've seen. He has a show on CNN, doesn't he? Or it's on one of the cable news networks. But
yeah,
it was a network show, and I've seen bits and pieces of it before. He's incredibly off-putting, and he has done a lot of work for super PACs and corporations. He does like promotion on their behalf. Like he's on their team. He's on the corporation's team. So yeah, this is not, so they know marketing, in other words, but they're marketing for the bad guys, and they always have. So it's no big secret who they are. As far as like what politicians do on Twitter, I thought it was wrong for Tulsi Gabbard to tweet Project Veritas. I also thought it was wrong for Ilhan Omar to, tweet Lincoln Project. I think both those things are not wise decisions on the behalf of either of them. But as far as politicians' activity on Twitter, and maybe you disagree with me on this one, but I've been this way, I don't follow any of them anymore. I follow 0 elected officials on Twitter. A couple exceptions to that would be like people running for office or like socialists or Greens. But as far as like Republican, Democrat, I follow nobody. And the reason I got to that point was because, throughout this entire pandemic where they just had giveaway to the bank after giveaway to the banks after giveaway to the banks, well, just basically telling the American people to go fuck themselves. The entire time you get these tweets from, and everyone was part of it. AOC, Tulsi, Ilhan Omar, everybody, Bernie, everybody. There was no one immune from this. They're just like, well, what would you do with an extra $2,000 a month? What would you do? And it's like, what are you doing to actually fight for that? And I got so tired of what I've dubbed the Ministry of Appeasement that I decided, I was like, I'm unfollowing everybody.
I mean, I don't blame you. I mean, the Democrats just gave oil lobbyists tons of money right before they went into recess again, without actually formulating a plan to give more people another stimulus. And Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump are playing political football with each other as to who's gonna back down and who isn't. We spoke about the pork that they're trying to fill this bill with the other day, and Trump is trying to one up Nancy Pelosi by saying, well, if you just do a single COVID bill, I'll pass it. And instead of really,
which they could call his bluff.
Exactly. Instead of doing that, though, they're just not doing anything. So it's really unnerving to see politicians really promote all of this symbolic platitude full of nothingness as evictions are starting even to accelerate more. We have mass unemployment. We have homelessness here, especially in the state of California. This is why I precisely hate it when people say that a Democrat will make everything better, because we live in a Democratic supermajority, Ron, and all you have to do is drive a few miles to see tent cities everywhere and empty mansions with literally nobody living in them. So that's what we're facing here. And these people, if you talk to them, which Johnny and I interviewed a few, none of them give a damn about the presidency. Because at the end of the day, no matter whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden, they're still going to be poor. They're still going to be homeless. They still are getting their water shut off by the city because there's an encampment that they've formed in Echo Park. And the city decided to shut down their electricity, shut down their water. And that is the city. That is their mayor. Governor Newsom isn't doing anything but throwing out fracking permits left and right. That's all he's doing. He vetoed a ranked choice voting bill, and he also vetoed the eviction bill that would have helped people more. Now they have to pay 25% of the rent. People aren't going to have that money. So my point is, we're living in a democratic state. The entire West Coast is a Democratic supermajority. The entire West Coast was also one of the main areas where the mass protests took over, as well as the fires. So it's really unnerving to see politicians really focus on bullshit when people are really, really suffering and nothing is getting done.